Thank you, Senator, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So first, I want to start with the topic that we've been talking about, it seems the most so far this year, property taxes.
Right.
So your district is District 17, out here in Boise. What are you hearing from your constituents on property taxes?
Well, I'm hearing the same thing that a whole lot of other people are hearing, that property taxes have really gone up significantly and people are struggling with that issue. This really started, especially in my area on the bench, in 2015 when the legislature passed a cap on the homeowners exemption. And that got passed just at the time that property values really started to increase. And so neighborhoods like mine in particular got hit really hard by that cap. And people have seen their taxes go up significantly since that was put in place.
So one of the pieces that's been brought forward of legislation so far has been House Majority Leader Mike Moyle's bill to freeze property tax revenue for cities and counties for 1 year. That just made it out of the House Rev and Tax Committee on a party line vote. If it were to come to the Senate, do you think it's still going to stay a partisan issue?
You know, it really shouldn't be a partisan issue. That is literally a mathematical issue, and that's how it should be looked at. And I'm hoping that we can kind of have that conversation in the Senate when the bill comes over to the Senate side. Freezing property taxes for a year sounds better than I think it really will be in practice, because reassessments happen in all areas of the county at different points in the year, so assessed values could go up. If you freeze revenues, you're just spreading out the need even further, and I don't think that people will see the relief from that folks think they will, but I do think they'll see a real downturn in services as a result.
So how do we get to that relief that so many homeowners need?
Well, it's not a one-size-fits-all relief. There's a whole lot of pieces of this puzzle that we really need to be looking at. We need to be looking at raising the income qualification for seniors to qualify for the circuit breaker. That income floor has not been raised in many, many years. Seniors are still on fixed incomes, and we need to make the circuit breaker available to more seniors to give them some really good property tax relief. We need to address the damage that was done here at the State House when that cap was put on the homeowners exemption, because it really is, combined with the increase in property values, what has caused this problem. And then the state's got to get its own house in order. If you look at a tax bill, a third to way more than a third of that tax bill is education bonds and levies, because we're not adequately funding education here. County taxpayers, county property taxpayers are covering the cost of Department of Corrections inmates being housed in county jails because the state isn't reimbursing properly. So we have a lot to look at.
So I know one of the arguments that the members of the committee kept pushing back on was the idea that increasing the circuit breaker or increasing these things would just shift the tax base to someone else, to other property owners who might not benefit from it. Do you see any problem with that approach?
Well, you know, the big shift came again with the cap on the property tax exemption. It used to be, especially in Ada County, the divide between the portion of property taxes paid by residential taxpayers and paid by commercial taxpayers was around 55 to 45%. And it would fluctuate 3 to 4% per year up and down. But since that exemption was capped, it has skyrocketed. The graph has just opened up so much wider, and it's well over 71% for homeowners now and less than 30% for commercial properties. And so a real inequity has developed there, and we need to try to bring that graph back more toward the middle.
So moving on to another issue that's been brought up recently is the trans rights. There have been a couple bills introduced regarding trans girls and women playing in sports. There was just one introduced about birth certificates and changing the gender marker on there. What's causing these legislations to come forward?
You know, you have to ask that question of the people that are bringing that legislation, because there does not appear to be a problem out there to be solved, right? The gender markers on birth certificates issue was decided by a court, and there was a rule that was promulgated as a result of a court order that said that people were able to change their gender markers on their birth certificates. And we should be following that court order. And then with regard to trans women in sports, it's not, these are women, and they should be playing sports with all the other women, and I just feel like this is an issue that is unnecessarily divisive.
So for the past couple years, you've been the one who's introduced the Add the Words bill that would add sexual orientation and gender identity to Idaho's protected classes. Ada County just passed a non-discrimination ordinance. It seems to be somewhat modeled after what Boise City did when you were on the council. Is that bill going to get a hearing this year?
I always hope so. I continue to introduce it because I think it's an important issue to keep alive. And I really congratulate the Ada County Commissioners on a bipartisan adoption of that ordinance. That was a big deal. So we'll keep trying. I don't know that we're going to wind up getting a hearing on it this year, but I think it's too important of an issue to just let it sit on the shelf.
So this is an issue that Senator Hill has stated his desire to try to find a compromise that both gives protections to those in the LGBTQ community, but also protects religious freedoms. With both you and Senator Hill retiring at the end of this session, what do you think the path going forward looks like?
Well, I think that's been one of the good things about continuing to raise this issue every year, is that you in your time here, you set that table, and others who come after can keep the conversation alive. I hope at some point in time it will turn. It's very important to people in Idaho with loved ones, families, friends, neighbors. It's also a really big deal for businesses. We see a lot of businesses that pass on Idaho because of the lack of protection for their employees. And so, progress has been made, and I think that we can get there. I hope I'm around to see it happen.
So last year, Senate Health and Welfare held quite a few debates over Medicaid expansion and how we were going to implement Medicaid expansion. Now that we're 6 months in from when that happened and we're starting to look at the next fiscal year, are you happy with how it's been implemented so far?
Medicaid expansion is going very, very well. The numbers that have been projected for enrollment are holding. It's actually even a little bit lower than what was anticipated. That I think will catch up, but the good thing about that is that the fears that were put out there of an onslaught of so many more people enrolling have not come to pass. The numbers have been kind of spot on. People are getting health care for the first time. I got a letter the other day from a woman over in Twin Falls who said she opened her mail and her Medicaid card was in there and she cried. The letter made me cry. I mean, it was just, she finally had health care and she could keep working and taking care of her kids. And that was the whole purpose of this. And so it's good to see how well it's working. We met with the rural healthcare physicians today, and it's rolling out well for the docs as well. So it's been a really positive thing for Idaho.
So just last week, Representative Moyle suggested that the one thing that's going to keep the legislature in town is going to be Medicaid funding. Do you think that that's going to be what keeps the legislature around?
I hope not, because it's really not necessary. Medicaid funding is paid for right now through savings to the state in areas that are now taken care of by Medicaid. And I don't believe there to be a funding shortfall. So it's already, the first 6 months have already been paid for, the first year is budgeted, and everything is coming in, like I said, numbers even lower than what we anticipated. So we're kind of good to go. I don't see the reason why it would keep us here.
Last question. A bill just passed the House that would require cities with a population over 100,000 to elect their city councilors by district. You served on the Boise City Council for about 10 years, 15 years. Yeah. What do you think about that proposal?
Well, I don't agree with it. And I served on the council for 15 years, ran 3 times in West Boise, the purported underrepresented part of Boise, and worked very, very hard and was fortunate enough to be elected. The opportunity to change the way councils are set already exists in code. So there's no need to change the code. There are those who will say, well, the people there aren't going to change it now because, their ox might get gored, they might lose their seat. But the people of Boise, when they want something, they make it known. They made it known in the last election, their position on the library, their position on the ballpark. And if it's an important issue to the city of Boise, I think that the citizens will get it done. In my 15 years, I never had one person come to me and say, council members should be elected by district.
Thank you so much for joining us,
Thanks,
Senator.
Devin. Appreciate it.